Now, in this age of cancel culture and safe spaces, free speech at universities and elsewhere in society is under enormous threat. Of course, we've seen countless examples of it here in Australia. Professor Peter Ridd sacked for speaking up at James Cook University, and Associate Professor Holly Lawford-Smith howled down by her colleagues at the University of Melbourne, merely for stating opinions that are pretty mainstream and starting a conversation about women's rights and how it conflicts with transgender activism. But how do we fix this? To help me answer this question, I'm joined from Sydney by the founding editor of Quillette, herself a champion of free speech, Claire Lehmann. Claire, thanks for your time. You've written a wonderful piece about this issue in The Australian today. Is there a free speech crisis on university campuses in this country?
It's a really important question. And what concerns me is that I don't think any data is being collected right now about this issue. Now, a couple of years ago, the coalition government got a former Chief Justice to do a review on whether free speech was in crisis on Australian university campuses. And he came out with his findings were that there was no free speech crisis. Now, I had a look at that review and I found it wanting. He didn't do any original research, as in he didn't go in and ask students in the classroom, do you feel afraid to speak your opinion because you might be censored either by your peers or by your teacher? And then there was no original data collected on whether or not academics themselves feel like they work in a hostile climate. So it's fine for academics who agree with all of the progressive ideology. They will say that there's no hostile climate, right? But they're like fish swimming in water. You have to go to the academics who are doing research that is a little bit controversial, like Holly Lawford-Smith at Melbourne University. Now, her interests are in, she's a political philosopher, but she's also interested in how transgender rights might impact biological women. Now, she set up a website where women can anonymously report their stories of any interactions or conflict or anything like that they might have with a transgender woman in, say, a bathroom or a fitting room or even in a prison, formerly women's only spaces. And her colleagues, because of this, 100 University of Melbourne academics have signed an open letter along with about 1,000 students calling for her to be disciplined, basically, and they've attacked this website, but they've attacked her other scholarly work. Now, this flies in the face of a principle called academic freedom, and academic freedom is the foundational principle of a university. Without it, there's really no point in having universities. I mean, we have other institutions like churches and, you know, like academic freedom is why universities exist.
Well, academic freedom is under attack from that method they're using it to bully people who dare stray from, the accepted thinking. And it's the open letters. That open letter seems like such a harmless piece of activism, but it really is destructive and a form of bullying to shut up academics who dare engage in a little bit of free thinking or critical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's only happened in the last few years. Open letters have become increasingly fashionable, particularly overseas in UK universities and US universities. And there used to be petitions, petitioning the government about climate change or whatever, and that's fine. But now there are petitions to get a professor or a junior academic fired and cancelled. And, these poor people have thousands of people signing on to these letters that are often egregiously written. Like, there's mischaracterizations, there's a lack of evidence, there's smears.
Bad faith.
Not, yeah, that's right. And these poor people, and I know a few of them because they've written for Quillette, and some of them are quite young, their entire careers are derailed because some nasty people get together, put together an open letter. It gets spread on social media. A lot of the time people are just signing onto it to look good in front of their peers. They're not actually across the issues. They're not familiar with the academic who's been targeted. And it's this social media driven sort of witch hunt in a way that's really, it's scaring academics, and it's making a mockery of academic freedom.
Now, just lastly, Claire, if you could just tell us, what would you recommend the federal government do to address this issue? Because obviously that review they did was pretty hopeless if nobody was even talked to, if they didn't even bother going to universities and speaking to the students about how this culture inhibits them. So what's your main recommendation to the federal government to address this issue?
Yeah, I think some research needs to be done. So a team or even just one researcher needs to keep tabs on the climate of open inquiry. So they should be surveying academics across a range of different fields, surveying them anonymously, getting a sense of whether they're inhibiting themselves, their research or their opinions because they're afraid of censure from their peers. And we also need data collected on the way students feel in the classroom. I mean, there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that suggests that students who aren't sort of on the left feel inhibited to really be themselves in the classroom. We need hard data. And once we get that hard data, then we can do something about it.
Claire Lehmann, thank you so much for your time. You always talk common sense.
Thanks for having me, Rita.